So hello and welcome to the third video in the Pleasant Vices series. I'm Tasha Marks, your host for today. And today's video is all about alcohol, and we're going to be focusing on ancient Egyptian beer. And I'm accompanied by Susan Boyle.
Yes, I'm here because I am a drinks researcher and a beverage consultant who has a big interest in beer and brewing.
And Michaela Charles.
And I'm a contemporary brewer at Alpha Beta Brewery based in Pick Your Restaurant, where we are today.
So what we're doing is making an ancient Egyptian beer as close as possible to the original methods. So we are using evidence from the British Museum collection, we have spoken to bioarchaeologists, we've spoken to experts at the museum, and we're also using an ancient Sumerian hymn called the Hymn to Ninkasi, which is, even though it's from 1800 BC, is pretty close to what we think the method would have been. The period we're looking at, the years is quite a wide time frame, between 3000 BC and 1500 BC. Is the sort of time frame. So plenty of different methods and ideas, but we're making something that really is as traditional and historic as possible. I mean, so the thing to say about beer really is it wasn't really invented, it was discovered.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, because what's so miraculous about beer is that it's dependent on these invisible microbes all throughout the atmosphere. So if you give those microbes the right condition and the right food to work on, beer will just be produced spontaneously. And when we look at ancient cultures and we see how important fermented products were to those ancient cultures in relation to creating a foodstuff that was relatively stable and more highly nutritious than some of the ingredients on their own, you end up with something that was not just a beverage, but a really integral, nutritious part of an everyday diet, particularly when we look at ancient Egypt, which is what we're looking at today.
Because, I mean, there's lots of sort of research about how the water wasn't really safe to drink. So beer was, main source of hydration. And so that made it very important as a foodstuff. We know that the workers who built the pyramids were paid in beer. It was a very important currency as well as a foodstuff.
There were penalties as well if you didn't make your beer correctly as well.
Oh, wasn't this an awful thing?
There was awful things about being drowned in vats of your own beer if you dared to make something that wasn't potable and delicious and safe to drink. So having a safe drinking source was really important to ancient cultures because it just wasn't as easy as turning on taps and getting water.
And also, we all started off, when we started this project, we all started off in the British Museum collection, looking at the artefacts that are on display from ancient Egypt. And that has really led our whole process. It's been very object-focused.
Absolutely. There were so many artefacts in the museum. There's models of workers making beer. There are models of the vessels that they fermented in. And there's actually a lot of the vessels as well in the museum. And the fact that these articles were put in the tombs as offerings just shows the importance of the brewers and the beer to the culture.
Yeah, it was completely essential. It was a part of everyday life, and it was something that you definitely wanted to make sure you could get going as soon as you got to the afterlife. That it would be a disaster if you got there and you didn't have any beer to drink. So you had to make sure that you had a working model. And for us as researchers in this area, that makes it just phenomenally wonderful to look at because we don't have to imagine what it was like. We have these artifacts that show the grain being ground down and then that being put into the vessels and the specific types of vessels and the strainers that were used. So you can follow this just pictorially to find out exactly how the beer was produced.
And one of the things that we knew we wanted to do right from the beginning was to make the vessel to ferment the beer. And Michaela's dad very kindly handmade the terracotta vessel which we used to brew the beer.
It's we were inspired by the beer brewing vessels that we saw in the collection, and they were from 1700 BC.
Around then.
Absolutely beautiful. They're single-fired redware vessels. So usually when you make a ceramic vessel, you fire it once to stop it being a soluble material, and secondly, you fire it again to glaze it. But Egyptian pops are only fired once. And then the wonderful thing about earthenware is it wicks heat. So as the liquid comes out, it cools. And as a modern brewer, to cool a fermentation is so important because brewing in Egypt, it would have been hot, it would have been arid, and to keep the yeast under control would have just refined the flavours to it. No end.
I had high hopes for the beer from the very beginning.
I was sceptical.
This is going to be delicious because it's a time-consuming process. No one is going to go to the effort of building breweries and having thousands of people make it and harvesting grain if they're going to end up with something that's like undrinkable in the end.
The idea of ancient Egyptian beer, what we expected to make was a sort of gruel-like, lightly alcoholic, some sort of horrible mash, and it wasn't like that at all. And we have learnt through making and discovered all these things which have been through
but
experimentation.
Tasha, throughout history, people like delicious things. Isn't this the crux of pleasant vices?
Yeah.
We love the things that taste good. Our society exists today because we were the ingenious people who could seek out the delicious things. And through that process, we ensured a history of brewing, of culinary, of so many different aspects. And it sustained long enough because we look for sweet, delicious things. And maybe things that are slightly inebriating as well.
So how does the ancient Egyptian method that you've done differ from modern methods?
Okay. So looking at the evidence from the archaeological digs, they looked at the microscopy residues in the pots, and they could determine that one mash was cold and it was malted grain. So what you have in this mix is water at an ambient temperature and grain that's gone through the malting process, and that's all we have in here.
Great. And then this one,
And
is the heated one.
The second container is malted or unmalted grain. They couldn't quite tell, in water that's hot, that's been then further heated.
And this is the main difference between the ancient Egyptian method and the modern method, is that a modern method is one mixture.
Yep.
It's very linear, straight down the line. This is two combination
steps.
of mashes, which we're combining.
Yeah. The things you need to achieve in a modern mash is you need the enzymes in the malt to be active. They will then take your starch, open them up and break them down into fermentable sugars.
Yeah.
And it happens within a very small temperature range. So in this one you have enzymes that are alive and active, and in this mix you have the starches have been stretched out into long strings ready to be cut back down. Combining the two allows these enzymes to work on this starch.
Great.
Yeah, excellent. Should we do it in that container?
Perfect.
You'll also notice the visual indicator on the hot portion. You can tell that the starches have unravelled because it's become gloopy and porridge-like.
Gloopy and porridgey and viscousy and thick. Perfect.
And it smells great.
Looks revolting.
This is porridge. And to that we're going to add the ambient temperature grain.
Tea full of enzymes.
And a completely different texture. There we go.
So how long are we going to leave this for? How do we know when it's ready?
Until it's fairly cool to the touch. Because the next stage will be to rinse it off and add it to the yeast. And if it's too hot, you're going to kill that yeast.
Yes, so you have to mind the yeast.
So next thing to do for the beer is to add our aromatics, our spice mix.
And in this spice mix, you have roasted pistachio nuts, some sesame seeds, coriander, rose petals, kind of and cumin, your classic dukkha.
So we're going to then decant our two mash mix into the vessel. What's the first line from Macbeth? Like, we three be together.
And now we get to do a little bit of flavouring.
Yep, one each.
One each. Pop our little dates in.
That was a bad idea. I know. So the dates, I mean, we've put them in now. This is the first brew that we put the date straight in, but just because we know it speeds up fermentation so much, we're going to speed up this process.
Absolutely.
And then next up, we're going to put in our aromatics.
Yes. So this just stops any potential bits and pieces plopping into our brew, because we're going to essentially open ferment it.
Yeah.
It leaves enough space for air and microbes to circulate, but not so much space that spider legs would get into it.
So, I mean, after a couple of hours, this was already really beginning to bubble and ferment anyway.
Yeah.
And the longer you leave it, the stronger the alcohol is going to be. And just after 2 days, it's finished its fermentation.
Our experience in the last few brews, it's just gone so quickly.
Yeah.
Normal fermentation will take 12 to 24 hours to start, 2 or 3 days to hit high krauts, and then another couple of days to complete. So this method is very, very efficient.
Right, so I think it's time to do a bit of tasting of your experiments. So this first one was...
The first iteration was the very basic process, the 2-mash process, without any additions at all. But it's worth noting it was fermented in steel, not the pot.
So this is brew number 1.
Wonderful, thank you.
So we've got a little carbonation going on there, which is nice. So because this has been stored under pressure and airtight, it means that the beer can develop a carbonation.
There's almost something citrusy
a little bit
in there, isn't
winey
it?
as well. 'Cause that for me is always the hint of like a little bit of a wild fermentation going on when you get something that's almost a bit vinous. That kind of, oh, it's just delicious. I love this. Strong too.
And this is how you sort of learn through making, because, you know, a lot of the writings about ancient Egyptian beer in the past have said that it's a thick, porridgey consistency, and this is from chemical analysis.
Golden, it's
As a
beautiful.
beer, it's grainy,
Yeah.
it's smooth, it has no bitterness, but it has that slight sourness.
I mean, if you're doing a chemical analysis of a pot, what you are picking up is the slurry that was left in there, this residue from the beer making process that's left at the bottom. Of course, if you think that's what the texture of the beer is, that's what you're gonna deduce. This one here has the dukkha spice mix added.
Yes. So
what are we expecting from this one?
Well, we're going. This is the addition of other flavors in it too. So you should get a nuttiness from the roasted nuts, a perfume from the rose petals, and look how gorgeous and golden and clear that is.
And this one's been fermented in the vessel.
In the vessel. So now we have the influence of the terracotta on it and that cooling process throughout the brewing period. So yes, straight away I'm getting much more floral on the nose, spiciness as well. There's the coriander, that kind of resiny aspect is coming through, and I'm getting that kind of toasted nuttiness.
Much richer aromatic sort of...
Yeah. And it has an earthiness as well. It has a real earthiness.
That's really good.
That's really good.
Third iteration, we left out the spices, but we wanted to see what would happen if we added the dates to it, because there's talk about putting dates in and not putting dates in and just sweetness. The thing with this beer is I couldn't measure the ABV
Off the scale.
I couldn't actually measure it. I had to phone the manufacturers of the equipment to query it, because it went to 0 on the scale and then just carried on going. So something in the process of adding dates to it.
So that means loads of sugar, very alcoholic.
Loads of sugar, loads of wild yeast, very alcoholic. We used an amount of grain. We downed the amount of grain again to try and hit this 4%. It should have been 4%. It went straight through to 6.
This is the thing. I mean, ancient Egyptian beer is, you know, a lot of the studies, even the bioarchaeology studies, have found a very low ABV, but we're struggling to keep it below 5%.
Yeah.
We're really,
It's just so
it just
efficient.
happens in a matter of hours. It's gone.
Yeah, it happens quick and it's very efficient.
It's quite smooth.
It's delicious and has this clovey aspect too.
Yeah.
It's really lovely.
I think this would be a dangerous thing to drink, because it's very
Deceptive.
Yeah,
6%.
that's ridiculous. It doesn't taste like it at
If
all.
I was doing a blind tasting, there is absolutely no way I would have guessed this at being a 6% beer, because it has a lightness of body that belies the amount of alcohol that we know is inside it.
I mean, none of them look like the turtle soup we were expecting.
No.
They look like beer, don't they?
They do look
They
like
don't
quite
have
nice
the
beer.
head that you would expect, but I think
that's
that's a little bit to do with carbonation. It's very
This, I mean,
refreshing.
that is a very beautiful colour as well. The golden, very luscious, and the
Yeah,
flavour in that
especially,
was
it's
incredible.
gorgeous.
So well done, you guys.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us experiment, and also to be able to go back to something that is so old, to take inspiration from pieces in a museum, and to make those pieces from the past help you question the foundations of what you know about beer and brewing has been a truly remarkable process. I'm going to look at everything in a different light.
Thank you for watching the Peasant Vices series all about ancient Egyptian beer. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to the British Museum YouTube channel by clicking this link here. And you can watch the rest of the series by clicking over here. Thank you so much for watching.